Ready to talk Oklahoma State Cowboy football and basketball. I'm Guerin Emig of the Tulsa World. I'm a columnist. With me on the Zoom/podcast is Eli Lederman, the beat writer who covers the Cowboys based out of Stillwater. You can catch us weekly at tulsaworld.com doing the video version of this. You can also find this where you find your podcasts, your podcast listing. We'll have more details specific to that as we move forward, but we appreciate you tuning in however you choose to do so. That's the gist of the message. Eli, you wrote for the Tulsa World today an update of sorts on the Oklahoma State, I'd say roster, but it really focused on three areas of potential attrition concerning next season. So let's start there. What are they, and then how serious are we talking about in terms of attrition?
Yeah, so today is it's Friday morning. Tomorrow will be 2 weeks from the Fiesta Bowl. Feels like a lot longer. Camelback doesn't feel so distant in the memory and our time in Arizona, but we're 2 weeks from there. And obviously at the end of every college football season, there's going to be change, coaching staff changes, players who graduate, run out of eligibility. But now in the era of the transfer portal, there's even more movement. And so if I've got my numbers right, it's 8 scholarship players from Oklahoma State have entered the portal since the Big 12 title game. Mm-hmm. 5 guys who had the ability to come back next season had eligibility, have declared for the draft. And then with them are your Malcolm Rodriguez's, your Devin Harper's, your Jalen Warren's, the guys who had no opportunity to come back. They'll also probably be exploring their pro potential. And that leaves Oklahoma State, as things stand right now, about 2 weeks after the end of the season, with 3 real trouble spots on the depth chart. And I hit on those in the Tulsa World today. And that's the secondary, the offensive line, and then that running backs room that no longer has Jalen Warren.
What's most serious? Usually you'd say running back because that's the position with the ball more than the offensive line who's blocking for the running backs or any position on defense. But given A, OSU's inconsistency on the O-line, and B, the strength, obviously, of the Cowboys defense a year ago, there may be as many fans who turn their attention to those 2 spots as they do running back.
I would start with the secondary, and that to me is going to be maybe the most interesting spot to look at, and it will be probably remaining that way into the early weeks of next season. Mm-hmm. Offensive line, every year there tends to be something to figure out. There's a handful of schools in the country who are lucky enough to go into a season, with 5 guys they're confident in, or maybe a 6th is depth. But we'll start with the secondary. So Christian Holmes, who emerged as kind of that second cornerback this year and was really successful, he's gone, no more eligibility. Jarp Bernard-Converse might be the one holdover. He hasn't declared either way, announced his intention, but maybe the fact that we still haven't heard is an indication he will be back. But the real hit is at safety.
Yeah.
So this year you really had 4 starting level safeties. It started with Trey Sterling, Colby Harvell-Peel, and Tanner McAllister. And then through injury, Jason Taylor emerged as that playmaker who just had a knack for getting his hands on the ball, whether he's on special teams or playing at safety. And he's probably the only one who will be back, because Tanner McAllister is off to Ohio State, reuniting with Jim Knowles. And Trey Sterling and Colby Harvell-Peel are headed to the NFL draft. And that leaves Oklahoma State with a real hole in the secondary. And we know that next year they come back with most of that pass rush from what was the best pass rush in the nation this year.
Yeah.
Brock Martin will be back. Colin Oliver, Trace Ford would be the guy to add to that group, and that makes them scary. But the back end is a real mystery.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, when you're trying to track free agency, weeks and days get skewed. Yeah. Was it not this week where Israel Antwine declared his intention to turn pro? Speaking of the D line there.
Yeah. And not to sort of jump away from what we were talking about, but I think the interior of that D line is actually maybe that 4th trouble spot, because you've had Jaden Jernigan leave and Israel Antwine, and that's 2 of your top 3 tacklers on the interior of the defensive line. And we think Brendan Evers is going to be back. And you wrote this week about Jackson Player, the Tulsa transfer, and sounded like OSU was maybe in the running, might not be among the front runners if you read some reports elsewhere, but that's another hole. But as it relates to the secondary, to the safeties group, it's kind of interesting. You've got, I guess, 2 factions you could look at to fill those roles. If we assume Jason Taylor is one of the 3 starting safeties, leave 2 spots. Thomas Harper would probably be one of my front runners. It's Devin Harper's brother, who
Right.
featured pretty heavily in the rotation this year. He was in a sling and didn't play in the Fiesta Bowl, but he would seem a likely choice. And then behind him, Sean Michael Flanagan's a guy who's played. Kenyon Williams is the special teams ace. And I don't quite know how he translates into the secondary and into that role, but he would be a guy to watch. And then probably the thing that most fans would be more excited about, because it's always exciting to be excited about guys you haven't seen, are the young guys.
Right.
Kendall Daniels, the Bags product, who people were really excited about coming. He would probably be the guy if you wanted to look at. He'll be a sophomore, young guy who hasn't played yet, who could maybe factor in at least into that rotation. I don't know if he'll be starting week 1 against Central Michigan, but he could be a guy. And then behind him, there's Lyric Rawls, there's Ty Williams, and Nick Session. So there's plenty of options at safety. The question, and I just don't know how anyone could predict it. Can they bring a production that, 2 NFL caliber safeties and a guy who's now off at Ohio State was given him this year?
You could almost say the same at running back, can you not? Because there are some intriguing talents. Let's use that word, prospects maybe, who Mike Gundy has recruited along with Casey Dunn and John Wozniak into the program. But until you see it, you just don't know it. And so that leaves, without Warren and LD Brown and Desmond Jackson, that leaves you with Dominic Richardson in terms of proven ball carrying production. But again, in the wings, the potential is there for there not to be as much let off as would appear, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, I've probably written this number into the ground, and will continue to write it into the ground all the way until the kickoff next year. But between Jalen Warren, LD Brown, and Des Jackson, that's pretty much 80% of the handoffs to OSU running backs. Jalen Warren was at like 61%, so he takes up a big bulk of that, and he's obviously the major loss. But it leaves them not only without maybe their top carrier, but just without veteran experience and depth. He's been, at this point, it's Dominic Richardson, who, it's worth pointing out that every opportunity he's gotten, every time he's carried, 10 or more times in a game over his 2 years in Stillwater, he's been productive. And so as things stand now with no transfer addition, he's your guy. And behind him would be Jaden Nixon, who really got a few opportunities in the blowouts. His big moment came against TCU with the 63-yard carry, and he flashed his speed. And between those two running backs, you've got a bit of a salt and pepper maybe, where Dom Richardson is the physical guy and Jaden Nixon is the shifty speed back. But after them, there's essentially no experience. And so it's either going to be looking to the transfer portal. Oklahoma State already has an offer to Nate Pete, who is Stanford's leading rusher. And there's plenty of backs in the portal. And it seems like every day a Power 5 running back is entering the transfer portal. So there could be maybe that next Jalen Warren there. But beyond that, you've got 2 running backs. And again, we talk about young guys to be excited about. Ollie Gordon out of Euless, Texas, and then Beggs's CJ Brown, 2 4-stars. They're kind of 2 of the headliners in this recruiting class. And Mike Gundy said it the day after the Fiesta Bowl that it's been a while, but that they're used to having to get a freshman ready to maybe be that third back, and maybe one of those guys is ready. I think physically Ollie Gordon might be the one. He's already up around 200 and 230 pounds at 18 years old. And I believe, I know CJ Brown is already on campus as an early enrollee, and that'll certainly help him, especially coming up from 2A football to Power 5 Division I football. Right. But if Ollie Gordon's here too, there's no doubt he'll be bigger come the fall. And one of those 2 guys is likely at least going to get the chance to prove that they can be it. And that should be exciting for folks to watch.
In terms of perspective, Eli, this sort of wave of, again, for lack of a better word, attrition, whether it's guys turning pro, whether it's guys transferring for other opportunities, it runs counter to what Mike Gundy has avoided up to this point, right? And that is an exodus of players. Up till this offseason, he's sort of been the exception in the transfer portal era for however long it's been, in terms of hanging on to players and keeping them in the organization and the culture. Those are 2 of his buzzwords. And so that might set off a few alarms among OSU's fan base. I would caution you not to overreact. Remind you that this is the normal moving forward for everybody. And if you want proof of that, take what's going on at Alabama, team that just finished as the runner-up to Georgia in the national championship game. the standard, obviously the standard bearer for FBS for all of college football. I think Nick Saban lost nearly 10 players, has lost nearly 10 players since he lost to Georgia Monday night. What I'm saying is, this is not a sign that there are cracks in Mike Gundy's culture. This isn't a sign of discontent. This is a sign of how things go now for any coach anywhere. I would say. And if you have a counter to that or a statement to add to that, go ahead.
Man, you think Saban's lost it? I think it's over for them. Yeah, I think it's a sign of the times. I don't know where. So if it's 8 scholarship players for OSU in the portal, I don't know, where that compares to the teams who have lost the most or
right.
Held on to just about everybody. But I think it is just the modern realities that a number like eight players leaving at the end of a season on a roster, if you include walk-ons and everybody else, it's over 100 players. I think is maybe just that new norm, and it's not like you saw the top 8 players on the team leaving. Those
right,
and it's not a mass exodus. It's a few 3 offensive linemen who essentially were just leaving to pursue other opportunities. Tanner McAllister is one that I think was one of the surprises, and same with Jaden Jernigan. Jaden Jernigan went out and he spoke to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and just said, I wanted a chance to be the guy, and who could blame him on a pretty deep defensive line. Tanner McAllister we haven't heard from, but if he's got a good relationship with Jim Knowles and he says, hey, come to Ohio State, can't blame him much either. So I think it's in these next few years, we're going to see programs that lose more and less. And it's still about, I think, evaluating the individual case by case. Unless it's an off season where we see 25 guys go, and then you start to wonder what's up, are there cracks? But in this case, I think, as we laid out, Desmond Jackson's the next one. I think for him, he's got 1 year of eligibility remaining. Let's see where I can maybe do that, and whether it's at a different level or another school, get more opportunities. And I think for each of these guys, if you sat down and talked to them, there'd be individual personal decisions there. And that's, I think, for all the warts, the modern beauty of the portal.
Yeah. The week also brought a little bit of staff attrition, right? Reports popping up that a couple of sort of behind the scenes guys, but very important guys to what Oklahoma State accomplished defensively with Jim Knowles are reuniting with Jim Knowles.
Yeah. So you've got Michael Hunter, who's a former Cowboy who was on staff. And then Coy McFarland is probably the name people would know a little bit more about and came to know over the month of December after Jim Knowles left, because he was a defensive assistant who was working with the linebackers. And then Jim Knowles headed off to Ohio State, and he was the one working with the linebackers in the Fiesta Bowl prep. And man, if you spoke to Mike Gundy or Joe Bob Clements or any of the players, they all spoke really highly of him. And so it certainly is a loss. I think there's a balance here of overreaction. I wonder among the fan base if Coy McFarland was going to Michigan and Michael Hunter was going to UCLA, would even bat an eye. Obviously, there's the connection to Jim Knowles, and every conflation you want to make there about. Some folks have talked about ethics, and we're talking about college football here. They go together.
Yeah, you talk about a slippery slope.
Yeah, but I think they are losses, and I think. Maybe specifically with Coy McFarland, I don't know what his role is going to be at Ohio State exactly. But there's a bit of a kind of a backlog for Mike Gundy, is that whatever he chooses to do at defensive coordinator, that guy's going to likely have a position group. And maybe he's promoting from within. So it'll be Joe Bob Clements, who still has his role in the D-line, or Tim Duffy or Dan Hammerschmidt in the secondary. But if he hires from the outside, he's probably going to assign that person, you'd assume, logically, to the linebackers. And so there might not have been that role as a linebackers coach for Coy McFarland ahead.
Yeah.
And maybe this is some indication of that, that it's not going to be that Mike Gundy's staff is remaining in place and that there's going to be someone coming in. But yeah, a little turnover. And I think it'll be interesting. Mike Gundy had some of his veiled digs over the course of the Fiesta Bowl prep to see what he says when asked about those two guys leaving and particularly where they went.
I don't suppose Gundy's going to name a coordinator by the time we finish this podcast or video or whatever we're calling it.
Let's hope not. If with our luck this year between the OU stuff and everything else, it'll be like 6:30 today. I'll be finishing up the week, sitting down, trying to relax and enjoy our weekend, and then we'll be writing about a D coordinator.
Right. You hear anything this week? One way or the other? No.
Radio silent. It really has been. I mean, asking around, it's just sort of been what it is. I do wonder if the fact that it's now 2 weeks from the Fiesta Bowl, if that's again an indication that Mike Gundy's asking around places and not just looking to his own staff. But whether any of his own assistants were going to be top of the list or if they were going to be fallbacks if the interview process didn't pan out, it's really unclear. But you are seeing other staffs around the country filling out and either defensive coordinators from other programs making steps up to Power 5 programs like Oklahoma State's or assistants getting promoted to jobs elsewhere. Other programs are making hires, and we're just waiting to see here in Stillwater.
All right, so basketball. I guess we gotta.
Yep.
We figured this was we figured this was going to be a difficult week, just in terms of the itinerary for this team, going from Morgantown to Lubbock to Waco and playing 3 games in a really tight span with a lot of miles logged between those games. But you still had hoped, I think, to see a little bit more, I guess, fight from OSU, or more a competitive, maybe more of a competitive nature to the first 2 games of this road trip at Morgantown on Tuesday, and then last night in Lubbock. And it's again this early in any season, you don't want to paint too bleak of a picture, Eli. But goodness, you got Baylor tomorrow, a team that just lost to Tech and probably isn't going to be in the mood to lose again. And you say you get a break in the Big 12 and you play TCU. I suppose that's the case. That's the Cowboys' home game next Wednesday. But it still leaves you curious as to where this season is headed. Yeah,
I think there's sort of like 2 minds here to look at this. Last night post game, Mike Boynton gave a lot of credit to Texas Tech, and I think that's correct. I mean, Texas Tech may be playing; they might be the hottest team in college basketball. They've knocked off Kansas and Baylor in the last week. And so if you kind of just take what Mike Boynton said there and look at, West Virginia too, Baylor tomorrow, this has not been an easy run by any stretch of the imagination. And if the Cowboys don't pull off the upset in Waco, I don't think losing all 3 of these games would have been that shocking at the start of this trip.
Right. But
you look at the other part of it, and it's the performances and just where this team is at, and kind of losses that begin to look alike. They fell behind again early yesterday. They fought back, and they've had these stretches in games where they figure it out, and you see what this team has and the depth they have, and what happens when Isaac Likely is getting this team in transition, and Bryce Williams is knocking down shots. Bryce Thompson had one of his better games last night. And you can see all the pieces there, and they can put it together for a 5-6 minute stretch, and that's when they can erase a lead in the snap of a finger and get back into a game, but those stretches don't last. And that was the case last night. I think it was 19-8 at one point. They cut it to 21-21. And then at halftime, it's 42-27 because they gave up a 21-6 run to close the half. And the second half got no better. So it's seeing these little glimpses of this team, but them not being able to keep it there. And both Isaac Likely and Mike Boynton said it's not the physical. I mean, this week I'm sure they're tired, but Texas Tech is playing 3 games this week as well, but it's the mental, and it's just something with this group right now that they've got to figure out. And it doesn't get any easier going to Waco to try to do that. And it doesn't really get easier in the Big 12, like you said. I mean, this is shaping up to be probably far and away the most competitive and deep conference. And, if as we said, kind of off camera, you lose at Baylor, you come home for kind of a gut check game at home against a relative soft opponent in this conference in TCU. And if the Cowboys can't take that one, they fall below 500, and you don't know if they're going to get back up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the mental aspect of this is real. It is a chore to do what Oklahoma State has been asked to do this week. I understand that. There's the obvious issue of not having an NCAA tournament to play for, or any postseason whatsoever to play for, looking more and more likely. That's a problem, because that's what these guys live for. That's what college basketball lives for. But there's also the sense of good basketball, and Oklahoma State just isn't playing good basketball. That's the issue, and I don't see any signs even that they're throwing the towel in. I don't see bad body language. I don't see woe is me necessarily. I just don't see good basketball, and that I think is something that Mike Boynton would take full responsibility for at this stage.
I think so, and I think that's sort of what is left for them to figure out. There is no NCAA tournament to play for, no Big 12 tournament to play for, and they've talked about the regular season championship being the goal.
Right.
Looking more and more dicey with each game that passes. Sure. I do think there's still something to be had here in this season with this group. I mean, they're immensely talented. You can go 1 through 10, 1 through 11 in this rotation, and you look at guys who are immensely talented. They're deep, but they just haven't been able to put together a string of not even performances, but halves or stretches of 10 minutes where they look like they're at their highest of their potential. And until then, it's probably going to look a lot like games last night.
So we'll see how the Cowboys respond in Waco this weekend, and certainly keep a very close eye on what they do when they finally return home for TCU Wednesday, 7:00. Right, is the home tip next week?
Oh, yep.
Does that sound right? Okay, we'll go with 7:00. Maybe Eli, when we meet again, we'll have a defensive coordinator to review. I don't know.
I would like to speculate. You would think that come the third week in January, that would be the case, but I've learned not to speculate at this point on things like this.
Yeah. Mike Gundy does things differently. And this goes for a lot of his job. And that includes hiring practices. All right, man. Good to see you again. Enjoy the weekend, and you can catch Eli and me again next week via video, via podcast, however you want to consume the content. We will give it to you at the Tulsa World.